Hey guys, tonight we're gliding down the Nile, slow, sleepy, and shimmering under a pale Egyptian moon. The air is warm but gentle, and the sound of water brushing against your little reed boat feels like a lullaby written by time itself. Somewhere in the distance, a frog croaks with admirable persistence, and you can't help but think he's auditioning for the night shift orchestra. Thebes, the great city of Amun, lies ahead of you, a cluster of sleeping stone and whispering palms. You probably won't survive this. Ancient heat, that is. But don't worry, the night is kind to wanderers. The wind coming off the water smells faintly of mud and lotus flowers. Somewhere, someone's small cooking fire has just gone out, leaving a trace of smoke and roasted lentils drifting through the air. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from your bed, let me know where you are and what time it is for you right now. I love reading your comments, imagining little glowing screens scattered around the world like fireflies, all listening to the same sleepy stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The moon sits heavy and round, hanging low over the black surface of the Nile. You drift closer to Thebes, its reflection shivering in the water. The city has been asleep for hours, though even sleep here feels ancient and purposeful, like a spell cast thousands of years ago that no one dared to break. The riverbank approaches, dark silhouettes of palm trunks rising from the silt like the ribs of some colossal creature. Your oar dips quietly into the water. Each pull sounds like a sigh. Behind you, the stars stretch endlessly, and above the eastern bank, the faint outline of monumental pylons catches the moonlight. Thebes isn't just a city, it's a memory still alive. A place where gods once lived side by side with people, and even the stones seem to breathe. As you step from the boat onto the damp sand, your sandals sink slightly into the cool mud. The night smells of life, wet reeds, distant smoke, and something faintly metallic, like old bronze. You can hear insects, so many of them it's like the night itself is humming in tune. You take a moment to look around, the kind of pause that makes you feel small but safe. To your left lies the western desert, the necropolis, the land of the dead. To your right, rising from the river plain, are the living quarters and temples of the east. In ancient Theban thought, the living always belonged to the sunrise, the east, while the dead resided in the west, where the sun disappeared each night. You stand right between both worlds, balanced in the hush of midnight. The river catches a faint glimmer. A fish breaks the surface, then vanishes again. Somewhere upstream, a papyrus skiff bumps gently against a mooring post. You hear a donkey bray faintly in the distance, maybe annoyed that even at this hour, people still find reasons to move around. You start walking. The sand changes underfoot to rough stone slabs, the remains of a dock built in the time of the New Kingdom, perhaps around 1400 BCE. Historians still argue whether this particular quay served Karnak directly or if it belonged to one of the smaller processional temples downstream. You run your fingers along the stone edge, feeling the faint grooves left by centuries of mooring ropes. Above you, the city rises softly from the riverbank. Thebes is quiet tonight, but in daylight, it would be alive with movement. Workers hauling water jars, scribes crossing courtyards with scrolls tucked under their arms, and priests in linen robes walking purposefully from shrine to shrine. But at night, all that motion drains away. The city exhales, and silence fills the streets. You follow a narrow path leading inland, lined with tamarisk and acacia trees. The branches sway slightly, releasing a dry, sweet scent. In the near distance, the dark outline of a temple wall begins to form. It's massive, almost too large to comprehend in the moonlight. The wall seems to swallow the stars behind it. You pause at a small wayside shrine, a cube of limestone with a crude carving of Bes, the household god. His wide grin looks almost mischievous, as if he's guarding your path with a wink. People once left offerings here, a bit of beer, maybe a date, or a tiny clay amulet. Most of it has long since turned to dust, but the feeling remains. You touch the cool stone and murmur something, just in case Bes still listens. From somewhere nearby comes the faint hoot of an owl. Ancient Egyptians believed owls were guardians of the night, messengers between worlds. You can see why. The sound echoes across the stillness, both eerie and comforting, like the universe whispering, "You're not alone." You pass small mud brick houses with their doors shut tight. Through one half-open window, you glimpse a dim oil lamp flickering inside, a late scribe or maybe a mother tending a restless child. You imagine the slow rhythm of breathing within, the muted cough of a sleeping goat tied by the door. Life here, even in the shadow of temples, is simple and repetitive. Bread, water, the rise and fall of the sun. And yet, it's astonishing. These people built monuments that have outlived entire civilizations. You look toward the temple wall again, so high, so serene. Each block weighs several tons, but somehow everything feels light in the moonlight, softened by the silver hue of night. You notice faint hieroglyphs etched along the outer stones. Some are deep and crisp, others nearly erased by centuries of sandstorms. You trace one gently, a symbol for life, the Ankh. It's such a simple shape, loop and cross, but somehow eternal. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. Some Egyptologists think the Ankh may have originated from the shape of a sandal strap. Imagine that! One of the most sacred icons possibly inspired by footwear. You smile. Thebes does that to you. It mixes grandeur with the absurd. A breeze stirs, and you hear the faint clatter of something metallic, a temple bell perhaps, or a loose copper ornament swaying in the wind. The sound is delicate, almost human. You walk closer to the temple gate. The moon has shifted slightly, casting a thin stripe of light along the ground. You follow it like a path laid just for you. The sandstone glows faintly golden now, and the shadows seem deeper. You can almost sense the rhythm of the place, the pulse of rituals that once filled these spaces. For a moment, you imagine you're not alone. You picture ancient priests in linen kilts gliding between columns, carrying oil lamps that flicker like fireflies. You can almost smell their perfume, kifi, the sweet incense made from honey, wine, and myrrh. It would cling to your clothes for days. Historians still argue whether those nightly temple rituals were open to any onlooker or if only the high priests and chosen acolytes were allowed inside. Either way, the gods didn't seem to mind being watched. The offerings still came, and the temples still thrived. As you stand beneath the stars, Thebes feels alive again. The breeze shifts once more, and the faint scent of lotus returns, drifting from the river. The city murmurs softly in its sleep, the way old friends do when you pass them in the dark. You lean against a fallen block and close your eyes. The stone is cool, the air dry and light. You can hear the steady rhythm of your breathing, mixing with the pulse of the river, and for a long moment, it's hard to tell which is which. Somewhere deep in the distance, the faintest trace of a temple hymn floats up, barely audible, like a dream half remembered. You don't know if it's real or just the night playing tricks. Either way, you stay still, listening, until even the sound of your thoughts begins to fade into the hush of Thebes. You leave the quiet riverbank behind, your sandals brushing through fine dust as the path narrows toward the sacred quarter. Thebes seems even more silent here, as if every wall and doorway is holding its breath. Ahead of you, the faint glow of the moon catches on smooth plastered walls, turning them pale as bone. You walk slowly, letting the rhythm of your steps settle into the hush of the city. The streets are narrow, laid out like veins feeding into the heart of something vast and ancient. The air is warmer here, trapped between high mud brick walls that still radiate the day's heat. You can smell incense, sweet and thick, like honey mixed with smoke. It lingers from the evening rituals, curling lazily through the cracks of closed temple gates. A sleepy dog lifts its head from the shade of a doorway as you pass, then decides you're not worth the energy. Somewhere nearby, a potter snores inside his small shop, his wheel covered by a cloth, half-shaped jars waiting for morning. Everything feels suspended, caught between one breath and the next. You glance upward and see stars framed perfectly by the lines of rooftops. The sky looks impossibly deep, as if the gods carved it with their own hands. Ancient Egyptians thought the heavens were the body of Nut, the sky goddess, arching over the world. The stars were said to be her children, tiny lights moving along her skin. You imagine her watching you now, patient and endless, as you walk toward her temples. The street bends slightly, and the walls on either side grow taller. You've reached the edge of the sacred district, the home of the great temples of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu. These aren't places for crowds or chatter. Even at midday, priests move here in careful silence, their footsteps muffled by linen sandals. Tonight, it's just you, the moon, and the memory of their routines. You pause before a small stone archway. Carved into its surface are faint lines of hieroglyphs, names of kings long gone. You trace them gently with your fingertips. The grooves are shallow, the edges smoothed by time, but they still carry power. Each sign was meant to last forever. To erase a name was to erase a soul. And yet, time has a way of softly erasing everything, one grain of sand at a time. You step beneath the arch. On the other side, the air changes. It feels cooler, heavier. The walls widen into an open courtyard paved with worn flagstones. The moonlight spreads across it like water. Palm shadows ripple over the ground, and somewhere in the distance, a faint drip of water echoes from a stone basin. At the far end of the courtyard stands a low structure, a gatehouse of sorts, its doorway flanked by two battered statues. Their faces are half lost to erosion, but the shapes of crowns and crossed arms suggest they once represented Osiris, lord of the underworld. Their silence is not menacing, though. It feels more like a kind of watchful rest. You bow slightly out of habit, even though no one's around to see it. Historians still argue whether this smaller temple complex served as a shrine for visiting pilgrims or a private residence for lower-ranking priests. The archaeological evidence is mixed. Bits of domestic pottery found near ritual tools, traces of cooking fires beside offering tables. Maybe it was both. Maybe life and worship simply blended together here, as they often did in Egypt. You walk closer to one of the statues and notice faint paint remnants near the collar, a hint of turquoise, the color of rebirth. You imagine the original brightness, how the entire temple must have once gleamed in sunlight, covered in vivid blues, reds, and golds. Now, under the moon, it's all muted to gentle shades of silver and gray. Somehow, that feels more peaceful. As you wander deeper, you spot an open door ahead. Inside, the smell of incense grows stronger. You peek through and find a narrow corridor leading toward what must be the temple's inner court. The walls are covered in painted reliefs, scenes of priests carrying trays of bread and beer, of pharaohs offering flowers to the gods. One image catches your attention, a procession of geese being led by a child. The carving is so tenderly made that you almost smile. It's a reminder that even in the grandest rituals, someone had to handle the geese, and probably get bitten by one. Some things never change.
Your footsteps echo softly in the corridor, and you realize you're hearing more than just your own sound. There's a faint hum, a vibration, almost musical. You stop and listen. It's not a voice, not wind, but something else entirely. The kind of resonance that old buildings sometimes produce when they've soaked in thousands of prayers. The stones remember in their own quiet way. You reach the courtyard beyond the corridor. The space opens up suddenly, revealing high walls that almost meet overhead. Columns stand like silent guardians, their tops carved into open papyrus flowers. Between them, faint shafts of moonlight fall like silver ribbons, catching in the drifting dust.
You tilt your head back and take it all in. The immense weight of stone, the artistry, the sheer patience it must have taken to build. Ancient workers chiseled these columns with copper tools, day after day, year after year. One quirky tidbit you once heard pops into your mind. Some of the larger columns at Thebes were actually slightly tilted inward on purpose, so they'd appear straight from below. Ancient optical illusion. Take that, modern architects.
You walk slowly between the columns, the air cool and dry. The sound of your breath seems to travel forever before fading away. You feel a strange calm here, not the silence of emptiness, but of presence, the kind of stillness that holds weight. A small movement catches your eye. A bat flutters across the courtyard, its wings whispering against the air. It swoops once, then disappears into the dark. You smile. Even the tiniest creatures have made these temples their home now. Time has traded gods for wildlife, and the trade feels fair. You find a low stone bench near the wall and sit for a while. The moonlight slides slowly across the floor, marking the passage of time in soft increments. You wonder how many people have sat exactly where you are. Priests, travelers, maybe a thief hiding from patrols. The thought makes you grin. You wouldn't be the first to sneak into a temple after hours. Historians still argue whether common people were ever allowed this deep into the sacred precincts, or if these inner courtyards were reserved for the priesthood alone. Some evidence suggests that festivals occasionally opened the gates to the public, letting entire communities flood the space with song and color. Now, it's just you, and the silence feels almost sacred. You rest your palms on the cool stone beside you. It's smooth in places, rough in others, worn by centuries of touch. You imagine the countless hands that brushed this same surface, leaving invisible traces of warmth. Maybe that's why the stone feels alive. Somewhere beyond the wall, a faint gust of wind rattles a papyrus reed fence. The sound is oddly human, like a sigh. You look up again at the stars and catch sight of Orion climbing the sky. In ancient Egypt, Orion was associated with Osiris, god of the afterlife. The stars, they believed, were where souls of the righteous went to sail the eternal heavens. You picture yourself as one of those little lights, drifting peacefully through the cosmic Nile. A thin mist begins to roll in from the river, softening the outlines of everything. It wraps the temple in a gauzy veil, and you feel like you're walking through a dream. The smell of incense deepens. Somewhere far away, a water bird calls, its cry sharp and distant. You rise and take one last look around the courtyard. Thebes is sleeping, the temples breathing quietly beneath their weight of centuries. You step through another doorway, deeper into the sacred district, where the true heart of Amun's city waits beyond the next wall. The night feels thicker now, but you keep walking, slowly, calmly, as if the darkness itself is guiding your steps. The air grows cooler as you approach the looming gates of Karnak. Even in darkness, the structure dominates the horizon like a sleeping giant, the twin pylons rising above the palm line. You can feel the difference in the ground beneath your feet. The hard, paved processional road that once guided royal parades and sacred processions. The stones are smooth in the middle, worn shiny by centuries of sandaled feet and wooden sledge runners hauling statues of the gods. The faintest glow of moonlight catches the edges of the pylons. They tower higher than any building you've yet seen tonight. Two massive trapezoidal walls with a narrow passage between them, the shape of an open doorway to eternity. The scale is absurd, almost playful, as if the builders were daring future generations to question their sanity. And honestly, you kinda do. You stop and tilt your head back. The surface of the gate is carved from top to bottom in delicate reliefs. Pharaohs smiting enemies, priests pouring libations, gods towering over mortals, like teachers watching over restless children. The scenes are faint, half erased by centuries of wind and heat, but the stories are still there if you look closely. You run your hand along the stone. It's cool, smooth in places, rough in others, as if it's been sanded down by time itself. Historians still argue whether these great pylons were meant purely as religious symbols of the horizon, those two peaks where the sun rises each day, or if they also served a more practical military purpose, like monumental watchtowers guarding the sacred heart of Thebes. You decide it's probably both. In Egypt, the sacred and the practical often share the same room. You move closer, stepping between fallen blocks scattered like sleeping beasts. Some are enormous, weighing several tons, yet here they lie, as if dropped casually by careless gods. You notice deep holes cut into their surfaces, pockets where ancient wooden beams once fit, helping workers lift the stones into place. It's humbling, really. No cranes, no steel, just muscle, rope, and a lot of stubbornness.
A light breeze snakes through the gateway. It smells faintly of incense, old dust, and water lilies from the sacred lake beyond. You take a slow breath and step into the shadow of the pylons. The sound changes instantly. The night outside was open, wide, full of echoes. In here, it becomes hushed, like the air is thicker, pressed down by the weight of the walls. Every sound, the brush of your clothes, the crunch of sand, seems amplified.
The stone floor beneath you is cool. You can see faint remnants of paint on the wall, blue stars scattered over a dark ceiling, red and yellow lines tracing divine crowns. You picture the temple in its full glory, thousands of years ago, when everything was bright and fresh. Imagine stepping through this same gate in daylight, the smell of oil lamps and perfume thick in the air, music rising from drums and sistrums. A small shiver runs through you, not of fear, but awe. You're standing where countless people once passed, heads bowed, hearts steady. And now, it's just you and the moonlight, the same moon they looked at so long ago. You pause near the right pylon, where a small doorway breaks the massive wall. It's half blocked by rubble, but through it you can glimpse another courtyard beyond. A large scar runs down the stone beside it, perhaps from an earthquake, or maybe from a pharaoh's later renovation attempt gone wrong. You chuckle softly. Even divine architecture had its DIY moments. A half-buried stela leans nearby, its carvings almost gone. You kneel to brush the dust away and reveal a faint outline of a man kneeling before Amun. His face is worn smooth, but the gesture is unmistakable. Supplication, reverence, hope. A quirky tidbit springs to mind. Archaeologists once found graffiti here from visiting travelers of ancient times. Scribbles left by people from Greece and Rome, like, "I, Marcus, saw this great temple." The first tourists, leaving their marks in eternity's guest book.
You look back up at the pylon. Its sheer size dwarfs everything. Each block fits perfectly with the next, forming a geometry so precise that even after millennia, you could barely slip a coin between them. The moonlight turns the stone a ghostly silver, and for a moment, the carvings seem to move, the lines of gods and kings shifting slightly, as if stretching in their sleep. You step forward again, passing through the narrow throat between the pylons. A gust of cool air rushes out from the courtyard beyond, brushing your face like a sigh. You follow it instinctively. The passage widens, and you emerge into a vast open space, the first courtyard of Karnak.
Even in ruins, it's breathtaking. Massive columns line the sides, their tops broken but still proud. The open sky above is a deep, velvety blue, scattered with stars so bright they almost hurt your eyes. You can see the faint reflection of moonlight on a distant pool of water, the sacred lake used for ritual purification. You take a slow walk across the courtyard. The ground is uneven, scattered with fallen stones and fragments of hieroglyphs. A broken statue of a ram-headed sphinx lies half-buried, its snout worn smooth. These were once part of a long avenue leading all the way to Luxor Temple, miles downstream. A processional road lined with hundreds of sphinxes, each one identical, each facing forward, guiding the way for the god's journey during festivals. You imagine that procession, the heavy wooden bark of Amun carried by priests, shimmering in sunlight, gold catching on every surface. Drums beat, women clap. The smell of lotus and frankincense fills the air. Even the pharaoh walks barefoot. And you, if you were lucky enough to witness it, would stand right here, pressed among the crowd, eyes wide, heart pounding. But now, all that sound has been replaced by the quiet shuffle of wind. The echoes of feet have turned to the soft hiss of sand shifting over stone. The temple sleeps, but the memory lingers. You wander toward a column base, enormous and round. It must have been part of one of the smaller porticos that once lined this courtyard. You sit on it for a while, feeling the ancient dust settle around you. Somewhere in the dark, a lizard darts across a block, its claws making a faint ticking sound. You think about the workers who built this place, tens of thousands of laborers, artisans, and engineers, organized with precision that rivals any modern project. They worked year after year under the blazing sun, living in makeshift villages nearby. Some records mention that rations included beer, up to 4 jugs per day. You grin. Maybe that's how they stayed motivated. Historians still argue whether all these workers were slaves, paid artisans, or something in between. Evidence suggests that many were skilled laborers with their own homes and families, compensated with food, goods, and occasional festivals. It's oddly comforting to think of them as people, not faceless masses, men joking, sweating, and complaining about supervisors who probably thought they knew everything. Some things never change. The air stirs again. You glance up and notice the faint outline of birds circling high above. Night herons, maybe, gliding silently through the sky. For a heartbeat, you imagine their spirits, souls of those long gone, still keeping watch over the city they helped raise. A stray thought crosses your mind. These gates and walls have outlasted every empire that ever claimed them. The Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, all came and went, leaving only whispers. Thebes remains, not in triumph, but in quiet endurance. You stand and take a few more steps forward, into the deeper shadow of the temple. Ahead lies the hypostyle hall, the famous forest of columns that once supported a stone sky. You can just glimpse its outline from here, massive trunks rising from darkness, catching bits of moonlight between their fluted sides. You pause one last time beneath the pylons, glancing back toward the river. The night has thinned slightly, the horizon turning a softer blue. The Nile glints faintly in the distance, winding like a thread of silver through the plain. You take a breath, long and quiet, and step into the shadowed hall ahead, where the real heart of Karnak waits in the stillness. You take your first steps into the hypostyle hall, and the air seems to shift around you, as if you've crossed into another realm entirely. The noise of the world fades. Even the whisper of the wind outside disappears, leaving only the sound of your own breath, shallow and soft. You look up, and your eyes widen. Columns, so many columns.
They rise like trees in an ancient stone forest, massive and silent, each one carved with intricate hieroglyphs and crowned with open papyrus capitals that fan outward toward the unseen roof. The moonlight filters through cracks above, landing in pale ribbons across the dusty floor. Everywhere else, shadows reign, cool and thick, clinging to the carvings that coil upward along the shafts.
You take a few cautious steps. Your sandals make a faint tapping sound that echoes far longer than it should. The columns loom on all sides. 134 of them in total, historians tell us, though it feels infinite in the dark. The largest ones at the center rise higher than a 10-story building, and their circumference could easily wrap around a small car. You could fit 20 people arm in arm around one, and still have room for a few stray cats, of which, incidentally, there are probably several watching you from the shadows right now. You rest your hand against the nearest column. The stone feels cold and slightly damp, its surface etched with deep carvings. You can feel the outlines of hieroglyphs beneath your fingertips, the smooth curve of the ankh, the sharp edges of the waz scepter, the gentle arc of a falcon's wing. Once, these columns were painted in brilliant color, reds, blues, greens, gold leaf catching the morning sun. Now, only faint traces remain, like the ghosts of a long-faded dream. Above, the columns support stone lintels, each weighing many tons, fitted together so precisely that even millennia later, the joints still hold. Historians still argue whether these massive blocks were raised using earthen ramps, wooden scaffolds, or some long-lost technique that's never been replicated. Whatever the method, it worked. The roof, at least the parts that survived, still rests exactly where it was placed over 3,000 years ago. You move deeper into the hall, craning your neck to follow the carvings upward. The higher you look, the smaller you feel. The walls close in with their silence, but it's not oppressive. It's more like standing inside a giant's ribcage, safe under a canopy of stone leaves. The echoes of your footsteps fade, replaced by the faint hum of your own heartbeat. There's a strange comfort here, as though time itself slows down. You can almost imagine priests moving between the columns, torches flickering, shadows swaying like spirits. They'd sweep the floors each morning, wash the statues, light incense, and sing hymns to Amun-Ra as the first sunlight spilled through the clerestory windows high above. Their chants would fill this space with rhythm and resonance, the sound bouncing from column to column like sacred thunder. You pause and whisper just to hear how your voice travels. The sound comes back softer, slower, wrapped in an echo that seems to hum with its own memory. You grin. "The best acoustics in Thebes," you murmur. As you walk on, you notice something odd on the floor. A cluster of shallow pits arranged in a line. They're not random. Someone once used this space for practical work, perhaps shaping small stone pieces or setting up scaffolding. Archaeologists believe some of these marks were made by workers preparing to lift the heavy lintels. Others, they suspect, were part of games. Yes, ancient Egyptian workers apparently played a form of board game right here in the shadow of the gods. You can almost picture them crouched around, laughing quietly while pretending not to be on break. You smile again. Even in the most sacred spaces, people are still people. One particular carving catches your attention,
A depiction of Seti I offering a bouquet of lotus flowers to Amun. The king's face is serene, his crown detailed with delicate feathers. You notice that someone, most likely his son, Ramesses II, had later carved his own name over the original one, claiming credit for the entire construction. A timeless tradition of royal plagiarism, really. It's almost endearing.
You tilt your head back toward the column's upper reaches. High above, patches of moonlight flicker through cracks in the roof, glimmering like tiny stars caught between stone leaves. You think of the ancient painters who climbed scaffolds to decorate those spaces, balancing on wooden beams, holding lamps in one hand, brushes in the other. They painted the sky itself on stone ceilings, blue backgrounds dotted with golden stars. Even now, a faint dusting of pigment remains.
A small breeze drifts through one of the open clerestory gaps. It moves dust in lazy spirals, and for a brief moment, it looks like the air is alive. You watch as it sweeps across carvings, through shadows, then disappears as suddenly as it came. You keep walking, weaving slowly between the colossal pillars. The space is so vast, it feels endless, yet every few steps reveals something new. A broken statue, a fallen fragment of lintel, a discarded offering bowl filled with sand. You pick one up and turn it over. It's rough, simple, and faintly blackened inside from incense. You imagine the smell of resin and myrrh filling this space during ritual mornings.
Historians still argue whether this hall was designed primarily for processions or as a symbolic representation of creation, the primeval marsh from which life emerged. Each column, with its papyrus top, might represent a stalk rising from the waters of chaos. When sunlight once streamed through the high openings, it would have dappled the walls like rippling reflections. Walking here at dawn must have felt like stepping through the very act of creation itself. You step closer to the center of the hall, where the largest columns stand. Their shadows are deep and cool, the air thicker somehow, filled with the faint mineral scent of ancient stone. You look upward again, squinting to catch a glimpse of the lintels above. For a second, it feels like the ceiling is floating, impossibly light for all its weight. A small moth flutters past your face, drawn to the glimmer of your lantern flame. You watch it dance, then vanish into darkness. Even that tiny motion feels meaningful, a fragment of life in a place built for eternity. You reach out and rest your hand on another column. Its surface is pitted with tiny holes where pigment once held fast. Beneath your fingertips, you can feel the grooves of cartouches, royal names enclosed in ovals. Ramesses II again. The man really did love signing his work. Somewhere, perhaps, Seti I is still shaking his head. You take a slow breath. The air tastes faintly of dust and stone, but there's a softness to it, a quiet serenity that seeps into your bones. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. No music, no voices, only the faintest hum of the earth below. When you open your eyes again, the columns seem to have shifted slightly in the moonlight. Or maybe it's just your perception. They lean inward, embracing you, forming a kind of cathedral, made not for worship, but for stillness. You imagine standing here as the sun rises, beams of gold piercing the gaps, turning dust into glitter. You can almost hear the first bird of morning calling from outside, echoing between the pylons. Some visitors in the 19th century reported hearing what they thought were whispers inside this hall at night, soft, wordless sounds, as if the columns themselves were speaking. Modern explanations blame temperature changes, causing stone to contract and expand, producing faint creaks. But still, you can't help listening for one of those ancient murmurs now. You tilt your head, half expecting a voice, but all you hear is silence and the slow, steady rhythm of your own heartbeat. You take one last walk to the far end of the hall, where the light fades completely. Here,
The columns close in so tightly that the sky vanishes. It feels like standing at the bottom of an ocean of stone. You trail your hand along the wall as you move, fingertips grazing the carved outlines of gods whose names have outlived empires. For a moment, you feel as if the whole world has stopped. Time is a ripple caught mid-motion, and you are a speck drifting through it. You breathe out a long, steady sigh, and your voice seems to vanish into the columns' hollow bellies. The sound lingers there, trapped like incense smoke, before dissolving. Then you take another step, deeper into the temple, toward the next courtyard and the faint glimmer of torchlight ahead. The forest of stone remains behind you, vast and still, dreaming of sunlight that hasn't touched it in thousands of years. The silence of the hypostyle hall fades slowly as you follow the faint glow ahead. Your footsteps lead you into narrower corridors where the air feels warmer, tinged with something faintly sweet, the lingering ghost of incense. You pass through a doorway marked with faded hieroglyphs, and suddenly you are in the inner precinct of the temple, the place where the priests once lived, prayed, and kept their sacred routines. It is quieter here, though not empty. There is a rhythm to the space, the steady drip of water somewhere unseen, the flutter of bats high in the rafters, the faint hiss of sand shifting through cracks in the walls. You stop for a moment, allowing your eyes to adjust. The torchlight flickers along stone walls painted with fragments of color, still vibrant despite the centuries. You imagine the temple priests of Thebes moving through these same halls in soft linen robes, bare feet whispering over cool floors. They woke before dawn, always before the sun itself. Their lives were dictated by ritual, every movement rehearsed and repeated with care. The temple was their world, their home, their duty, their sanctuary. They began each morning with purification. Before entering the sacred chambers, they would bathe in water drawn from the Nile, the river that bound Egypt's soul. Some washed in the temple's own sacred lake, where the reflection of the stars shimmered across the surface long before dawn. The priests cleansed not only their bodies, but also their minds, reciting hymns as they poured cool water over their heads. "I am pure," they would whisper. "I am pure. I am pure." You imagine that scene now, the first light of dawn touching the lake, a few thin clouds glowing pink above the pylons. The priests move in silence, their breaths rising in the chill air. Their linen robes cling slightly from the water. Some adjust amulets around their necks, eyes of Horus, ankhs of gold, or tiny scarab charms, small reminders of protection and eternal life. As the first rays of sun begin to climb over the temple walls, they enter the inner halls. Their duties begin with the awakening of the god. Inside the sanctuary, a small shrine once held the statue of Amun-Ra, the supreme deity of Thebes. It was kept hidden most of the time, sealed behind heavy doors. Only the high priest could enter, carrying the sacred key. He would step into the dark sanctuary while the others chanted outside. His movements were slow, deliberate. He opened the doors, bowed, and greeted the god as though waking a sleeping friend. "Awake in peace, great Amun. Awake, Lord of Thebes." Then he would anoint the statue with sacred oils, dress it in fresh linens, and place before it offerings of bread, fruit, and flowers. The air inside would fill with the smell of myrrh and cedar resin, curling through the chamber like threads of gold smoke. You close your eyes for a moment and breathe deeply, trying to imagine that scent, warm, resinous, ancient. It seems to linger here, faintly, as though the temple remembers. When the ritual was complete, the priests would retreat, walking backward out of the shrine so as not to turn their backs on the god. Then the sanctuary doors were sealed again until the next sunrise,
Only the statue's shadow remained in the still air, resting in eternal darkness. As you walk further through the temple's side corridors, you pass small rooms where the priests once prepared offerings. You can still see shallow stone basins and traces of soot where incense burned. One chamber, now half collapsed, was likely used to store ritual oils: almond, lotus, frankincense. You imagine clay jars lined neatly along the walls, each sealed with wax, each labeled in careful hieroglyphs. You reach another small doorway, low and narrow. Ducking beneath it, you enter what feels like a living space, a residence for the lesser priests or attendants. The floor is uneven, the ceiling low. A few niches in the walls may have once held oil lamps or personal idols. In one corner lies a broken pot, half buried in sand. You crouch to examine it, brushing the dust away. Inside, you find a faint trace of something, perhaps dried grain, or the remains of bread once offered to the gods. The priests lived simple lives. Their days followed the rhythm of ritual, but their nights must have been quiet, filled with soft conversation, perhaps the telling of old stories. You can almost hear them now. One young priest complaining about the morning duties, another teasing him, an older one murmuring a half-forgotten hymn as he tends a small flame. Outside, the city of Thebes would have been alive. The markets, the houses, the laughter by the riverbanks. But within these walls, everything slowed. It was as if the priests lived half in the world of men, half in the world of gods. You find yourself standing before a set of steps leading upward. You climb them slowly, your lantern brushing light along the walls. At the top, there's a small open terrace. The night sky spreads above you, vast and still. You can see the faint shimmer of the Nile beyond the dark rooftops. Somewhere in the distance, a jackal cries, its voice carried on the wind. You imagine the priests coming here after evening rituals, standing in silence as they watched the stars. The Egyptians were great observers of the sky. To them, the heavens were a map of eternity, each constellation a divine story. The priests of Amun might have watched the rising of Sirius, marking the start of the flood season. They might have whispered prayers to the goddess Nut, who stretched her body across the sky to cradle the stars. For them, astronomy was not science, it was devotion. The movement of the heavens mirrored the pulse of divine order, Ma'at, the ballads that governed all things. The priest's duty was to maintain that balance through ritual precision, through words, through silence. You sit for a moment on the edge of the terrace, the stone cool beneath you. You close your eyes and imagine being one of them, rising before dawn, washing in the lake, performing the daily rites, and ending each day here, beneath the stars. It would have been a life of repetition, of quiet endurance, but perhaps also of peace. You open your eyes again and look down at the shadowed courtyards below. Somewhere beneath you, hidden among the pillars and passageways, are secret rooms, libraries carved into the walls where priests once kept papyrus scrolls. They recorded hymns, rituals, and astronomical calculations. Some of those texts, like the Book of the Dead or the Book of the Gates, described the soul's journey through the afterlife. Others detailed how to make offerings, how to purify a temple, how to calculate the movement of the sun across the seasons. A few fragments of those scrolls have survived, written in black and red ink, the handwriting neat and careful. The priests were not just servants of the gods, they were Egypt's scholars, healers, and astronomers. When kings needed guidance, they came here, to men who could read the language of both heaven and earth. You stand once more and descend the steps. The corridors seem darker now, the air thicker. You find your way back toward the central hall, passing again through rooms that once hummed with quiet work. You can almost hear voices, faint, distant.
Perhaps it's just the wind slipping through cracks in the walls, but for a heartbeat, you think you catch a whisper. The soft murmur of a prayer, recited endlessly across time. You pause and listen. May the temple endure for millions of years. May the offerings never cease. Then the sound fades, and you're left with silence again. Only your heartbeat remains. You take one last look at the dim corridor before stepping out into the open courtyard. The night air feels cool against your skin. Above, the stars shimmer faintly over Thebes, the same stars those priests once watched, night after night, whispering to their gods. Their words are gone, their names forgotten, but the temple still stands. The stones remember. And as you move onward through the moonlit ruins, you carry their echoes with you, soft, eternal, and utterly still. You slip deeper into the temple complex, leaving behind the living quarters and the faint smell of incense that still clings to the air. Ahead, another passage opens into a cluster of shadowy rooms, quieter, warmer, and faintly fragrant with something different. Beeswax, stone dust, burned oil. You've wandered into the temple's workshops, the beating heart of craftsmanship that once kept this place alive. Here, the gods didn't just dwell in prayers and hymns. They took shape in wood, gold, pigment, and stone. And it was the artisans, not the priests, who gave those forms to the divine. You step closer to the doorway and imagine the space as it once was. Busy, glowing, filled with the rhythmic sounds of chisels and brushes. The floor, now uneven and sandy, would once have been covered with baskets of tools and shards of colored stone. The air thick with powdered pigment, malachite green, ochre red, lapis blue. Men and women worked side by side, seated cross-legged on reed mats, each focused on a small fragment of eternity. You pause by a cracked wall where faint lines are still visible, a half-drawn figure of a falcon, its wings outlined in black. The artist must have been sketching the god Horus before the temple fell silent. You can almost see him now, steady hand, careful eye, pausing only to sharpen his reed brush against a small stone. His assistant grinds pigment in a shallow bowl beside him, turning stones to dust that would outlast dynasties. You walk slowly, running your fingers along a bench carved directly from the rock. A few gouges and scratches remain, the fingerprints of vanished craftsmen. It's strange how personal they feel. You find a small pile of limestone chips near one corner, as if the workers set down their tools one afternoon and never returned. In ancient Thebes, every temple was a machine of creation. The workshops produced everything the gods might need: statues, amulets, ritual vessels, jewelry for offerings, and even bread molds for the temple kitchens. Nothing in these rooms was ever made for mortals. Every stroke of the chisel, every bead of glass, every stroke of gold leaf was for divine use. You kneel to examine a small stone basin near the far wall. Faint residue lines its edge, traces of powdered copper mixed with animal fat. It might once have been part of a ritual paint mixture, used to decorate temple reliefs or anoint sacred statues. Historians still argue whether the vivid colors of Egyptian temples were meant to mimic life or to summon it, whether the act of painting was a kind of enchantment, breathing energy into the gods themselves. You look around again, imagining the light that once filled this space. Not harsh sunlight, but filtered gold from narrow windows, shafts of brightness gliding across stone floors. The workers would have hummed or spoken softly as they worked, their rhythm guided by repetition, the way a modern craftsman might hum along with a radio. One might have told a joke about the overseer's bald head. Another might have whispered a prayer that his carving wouldn't crack at the final stroke. Among the workers was often a scribe, the quiet one with dark ink stains on his fingers. He recorded everything. How many jars of pigment were used? How much gold leaf applied? How many statues completed?
It's said that in some temples, scribes even logged how many times the god's statue was polished each week. Bureaucracy, you realize, is as eternal as stone.
You move toward the back of the chamber, where a narrow doorway leads into a smaller room. The air feels cooler here, trapped for centuries. You raise your lantern and reveal a wall of shallow niches. Each one might once have held sacred amulets waiting to be blessed. Some may still lie buried beneath the sand. Small eyes of Horus, hearts of carnelian, or scarabs carved from blue fans.
One of Egypt's most common workshop crafts was faience, a glassy turquoise material made from crushed quartz, sand, and copper. When fired in ancient kilns, it glowed like sunlight on water. Thebes artisans were masters of it, creating everything from jewelry beads to miniature gods. You can almost hear the hiss of those kilns, the rush of air as bellows fed the flame, the workers shielding their faces from the heat. And then, a little humor slips in, you picture one poor apprentice accidentally dropping a bead into the fire, cursing softly under his breath while pretending it never happened. Even in sacred work, mistakes happened, and one imagines the gods might have been more patient than the overseer.
You step further into the shadows, following a narrow passage that slopes downward. It leads to another chamber, larger this time, and as your lantern's glow spreads, you see a low table carved from solid limestone. This would have been a sculpting table. In the center lies the broken remnant of a small statue, a falcon's wing, smooth and delicate despite the centuries. You pick it up gently. It feels cool and impossibly old. Somewhere above you, wind passes through the ruined pylons, and a soft moan drifts down the passage. For a moment, it sounds almost like the sigh of a craftsman at the end of a long day. In your mind's eye, the room comes alive again. Hammers tapping, stone dust swirling, the smell of oil lamps and hot wax. The head sculptor leans over his work, squinting at a block of granite as if negotiating with it. The younger apprentices sweep debris from the floor, pausing to glance nervously when the overseer passes. A priest might enter, inspecting the progress on a sacred statue, not for beauty, but for correctness. Each god had rules. The proportions of the eyes, the tilt of the shoulders, the number of feathers on a crown. One error, and the statue was useless for ritual.
The Egyptians believed that art wasn't just representation, it was creation. To carve a statue of Amun was to create a vessel through which Amun could dwell. Every tool stroke was a prayer, every polished surface a kind of devotion. You can almost feel that conviction in the walls, a reverence embedded in every scratch of stone. You wander toward another corner of the workshop, where you find a low platform scorched black. Perhaps this was where goldsmiths worked, heating metal in small clay crucibles, beating it into thin sheets for the gods' ornaments. A single speck of gold dust might still glint somewhere in the cracks if you look closely enough. Some scholars think these temple workshops were also centers of experimentation, early chemistry, alchemy, and medicine. Recipes for pigments, perfumes, and embalming oils often mixed practical skill with ritual magic. One old text from Thebes describes how to make the blue of the divine horizon, instructing the craftsman to chant as he grinds copper and sand together. Historians still argue whether such spells were symbolic or genuinely believed to alter the outcome. But perhaps, in a world where gods lived in every color, the distinction didn't matter.
You rest for a moment, sitting on a smooth block once used for cutting wood. The silence now feels almost respectful, as though the walls remember what they once sheltered. You think of how many hands worked here, generations of artisans whose names never appeared on temple walls, though their art outlived kings. A warm breeze slips in through a crack, stirring a faint cloud of dust. It sparkles briefly in the lamplight, tiny motes like golden sand. You breathe it in slowly, the air tasting faintly of stone and age. Maybe you smile a little, thinking that if the ancient artisans could see tourists snapping photos of their work today, they'd roll their eyes. We spent months carving that falcon crown, one might say, and you're taking blurry pictures of your own feet. Still, you can't help feeling grateful to them. Without their patience, the temples of Thebes would be empty shells. It was their touch that gave the gods a face, their colors that turned faith into something tangible. You rise to leave, casting one last look around the quiet chamber. The walls seem to glow faintly in the lantern light, painted in shades of faded red and ochre. Somewhere in that silence, you can almost hear a last chisel strike, the echo of devotion carved into stone. You step back into the corridor, the air cooler now, and the faint scent of beeswax follows you. The workshops fade behind you like a dream, their walls still whispering the same patient rhythm. Work, worship, creation, silence.
And as you move toward the next courtyard, you realize that in ancient Thebes, even the quiet act of mixing pigment or polishing gold was a kind of prayer, not shouted, not sung, but softly spoken through the hands. You step back into the open night, leaving behind the dim hum of the workshops. The air feels cooler now, kissed by the river breeze drifting up from the Nile. For the first time in a while, you can hear the faint lapping of water, a reminder that even in the stillness of this ancient place, the river is never silent. Its slow rhythm has been flowing beside Thebes since before the first stone of the temple was set. You begin walking toward it, following what seems like a long, straight avenue lined with broken statues. Their faces are worn smooth, their forms half swallowed by sand, but you recognize the pattern, one sphinx after another, stretching into the distance. This, you realize, is the processional route, the sacred road that once linked the great temples of Karnak and Luxor. The path would have been dazzling in its day. You can almost picture it. The avenues swept clean, lined with banners and flowers, the air thick with incense. At certain times of year, it transformed into the grand stage for one of Egypt's most magnificent ceremonies, the Festival of Opet. You begin to imagine the scene. It's dawn, maybe 3,000 years ago. Thebes is already stirring. Priests hurry through temple courtyards, preparing offerings. Musicians test their instruments. The low hum of sistrums and the beat of drums echo faintly through the halls. Outside, crowds gather along the riverbank, their voices hushed with anticipation. At the heart of it all, a gilded boat rests in the water. Not an ordinary vessel, but a sacred bark designed to carry the statue of Amun-Ra himself. The wooden hull gleams with gold leaf, its prow shaped like a ram's head, the symbol of divine strength. The priests lift the small shrine containing the god and set it upon the bark, covering it with embroidered linen and fresh lotus flowers. You follow the river's imagined current, your mind floating with that golden bark. It moves slowly, pulled by ropes and guided by priests along the waterway. Along the banks, people sing hymns, songs that rise and fall with the oars. The bark glides past gardens, painted houses, and docks crowded with spectators. Children toss petals into the water, merchants pause their trade to bow their heads. Even the fishermen seem to fall silent as the god passes by. In those moments, Thebes wasn't just a city, it was the center of the universe. The god of the sun himself was moving through his people, blessing the city, renewing the bond between heaven and earth. You walk a little faster, tracing the invisible curve of the river through the sand. The moonlight makes it easy to imagine the silver shimmer of water in motion. You can almost hear the chants. Amun-Ra, Lord of the thrones of the two lands, may you travel in peace. Historians still argue whether these processions were purely symbolic or if they carried political meaning, whether the priests used the spectacle to reinforce their influence over the people, or if it was genuinely spiritual at heart. Maybe it was both.
In Egypt, power and faith were often the same thing. You find yourself standing at a wide, empty space now, perhaps where the bark once docked during the ceremony. You crouch down and touch the cool sand. There might still be remnants of a mooring stone buried somewhere beneath your fingertips. The priests would have disembarked here, lifting the god's shrine from the bark onto a ceremonial litter carried on their shoulders. The procession then continued on land, along the avenue of sphinxes that stretched between Karnak and Luxor, nearly 3 kilometers of sacred road. You begin to walk that path now, slowly, as if you're part of the ancient procession yourself. You picture torches lighting the way, banners fluttering in the hot wind, and musicians playing soft, rhythmic beats that seem to pulse with the heartbeat of the city. The priests chant as they walk, voices overlapping in hypnotic patterns. The people follow behind, tossing flowers and clapping in time with the drums. And then, perhaps, a small moment of humor, because you imagine that amid all this grandeur, someone probably tripped on the uneven stones. Maybe a young priest stumbled slightly, the bark wobbled, and everyone gasped before pretending it didn't happen. Even in divine ceremonies, there must have been small human imperfections that made the gods smile. The road continues, straight as an arrow, flanked by sphinxes with the bodies of lions and the faces of kings. Some are eroded beyond recognition, their features softened into anonymity. But others still gaze forward with quiet confidence, as if guarding the path for eternity. You run your hand across one as you pass, the stone surprisingly smooth, polished by centuries of desert wind. In ancient times, these processions were more than pageantry. They were cycles of renewal. The god's journey from Karnak to Luxor symbolized the rejuvenation of both the king and the land itself. It was believed that through these rituals, Amun blessed Egypt with fertility and order for another year. The procession was a kind of promise, a contract between heaven and earth. As you walk, the night seems to thicken, filled with unseen movement. You imagine the torches flickering, shadows dancing on the walls, the hum of drums echoing through the air. The crowd parts as the god passes, and for a moment, silence falls, a silence filled with awe. Then, slowly, the festival resumes. The people sing again, laughing softly, their fear replaced by joy. There would have been feasts afterward, and probably a fair share of drinking. The Egyptians knew how to celebrate. The festival lasted nearly a month in some reigns, and even the most solemn rituals eventually gave way to music, dance, and the deliciously human act of forgetting that tomorrow's work still awaited. You smile faintly, picturing a priest sneaking a sip of beer behind one of the sphinxes when no one was watching. Sacred duty or not, the desert heat was relentless. As you continue, the avenue seems endless, each step an echo of those ancient feet. The moonlight glints off broken stones, hinting at the path's original symmetry. You wonder how many processions passed this way, how many kings, how many high priests, how many nameless workers watched from the shadows. When you finally pause, the air feels thick with memory. The Nile glimmers faintly in the distance, winding like a silver thread through the darkness. The gods no longer sail these waters, but the feeling of their passage lingers, a calm, steady rhythm that still moves through the night air. You take a deep breath, the scent of silt and desert blending in your lungs. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls from a ruined wall, soft, deliberate, timeless. You imagine it as a watcher of all these processions, a silent witness to the rise and fall of rituals now forgotten. You sit for a while beside one of the sphinxes, leaning against its cool flank. The stone feels solid, grounding, like it remembers the weight of centuries without complaint. In the silence, you can almost hear the splash of oars again,
the faint hum of voices, the whisper of linen robes brushing the stone road.
Thebes has many quiet places, but this one, the long road between temples washed in moonlight, feels different. It feels suspended, as though time itself slows here, unwilling to disturb what remains. You glance once more toward the river, imagining the god's bark fading into the night, its torches like floating stars. The procession ends, the music fades, and the water closes again over its own reflection. The path is empty now, but if you listen closely, you might still hear the faint echo of a drum, one steady beat marking the rhythm of a city that once sang to its gods.
You stand, brush the sand from your hands, and continue walking. The sphinxes watch silently as you pass, their eyes turned forever toward eternity.
The first light of dawn begins to spread across the eastern horizon, painting the limestone walls of Thebes in a pale gold. The darkness retreats slowly, as if reluctant to let go of the mysteries it concealed through the night. You rise from your resting spot near the Avenue of Sphinxes and look westward, across the quiet Nile, toward a landscape that seems otherworldly. The western bank, veiled in the morning haze, is where the sun dies each day. To the Egyptians, it was the land of the dead, the place of sunset, of endings, and of eternal beginnings. From here, they built monuments not for the living, but for eternity. That is where you are heading now.
You begin your journey toward the river's edge, where the faint scent of wet reeds and silt hangs in the air. The water moves gently, as though half asleep. You imagine the sound of oars dipping rhythmically, the creak of wooden boats ferrying people, priests, and offerings to the western shore thousands of years ago. The Nile wasn't just a river, it was a bridge between worlds.
A small felucca waits for you, its sail furled, the wood smooth from years of use. You step in carefully and push off from the bank. The boat glides with almost no effort, carried by the slow, ancient current. The reflection of the sky ripples in the water, pastel pink, soft lavender, streaks of gold. Even in its stillness, the Nile feels alive, whispering stories beneath your passage. Halfway across, you glance back toward the eastern shore. The grand pylons of Karnak and Luxor temples stand like sentinels of light, facing the rising sun. Ahead of you, the western horizon is darker, more solemn. The cliffs rise abruptly from the plain, jagged, golden faces cut by time. Somewhere within those cliffs, the kings of Egypt sleep in their tombs. As you draw closer, the outlines of the western temples begin to take shape. Their silhouettes stand massive and quiet against the desert. Deir el-Bahri, Medinet Habu, and the once glorious mortuary temples of forgotten rulers. Each was built as a bridge between a king's mortal life and his eternal afterlife. You step ashore and feel the shift immediately. The air is drier here, filled with dust and the faint scent of baked stone. The landscape feels heavier, quieter, more introspective. To the ancient Egyptians, this was sacred ground, the realm of the setting sun and the eternal gods of the afterlife. The first temple you approach rises in tiers against the cliffside, the temple of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahri. Even in ruins, it radiates elegance and balance. Broad ramps lead upward through colonnades of slender pillars. The architecture feels deliberate, graceful, almost serene, as though it was carved not from ambition, but from devotion. You walk slowly through its lower court. Once, this place would have been alive with color, painted reliefs of the queen's divine birth, her trading expeditions to the mysterious land of Punt, her offerings to Amun. The paint is mostly gone now, worn by time, but the carvings remain sharp, etched deep into the stone. You trace one with your fingers, a row of incense trees, carved so finely that you can almost smell their sweetness. Hatshepsut was a woman who ruled as pharaoh, something rare and remarkable in her age.
Her temple stands as both her offering to the gods and her statement to history. Even after thousands of years, it feels defiant yet peaceful, a harmony of strength and grace. You climb one of the ramps, the sound of your steps echoing softly. The cliffs loom closer overhead, steep and golden, their faces catching the light. This entire scene, the temple rising from the desert, the cliffs towering behind, feels like part of a single composition. The builders didn't fight the landscape, they shaped it into their story. As you reach the upper terrace, a breeze passes through the columns, carrying the faint scent of desert flowers. Somewhere below, the Nile glints faintly in the distance. You pause there, looking out over the valley, and try to imagine what it was like during the days of Hatshepsut's reign. Priests chanting hymns in the morning light, processions of offerings, jars of wine, baskets of bread, garlands of lotus and papyrus. The queen herself, standing beneath a golden parasol, watching as incense smoke curled into the sky. For her, and for all who ruled after, the temples of the West were not places of worship in the ordinary sense. They were portals, eternal stages where their spirits could meet the gods in ritual form. Each morning, when the sun rose on the eastern horizon, its light would cross the river and touch these stones, renewing the cycle of life and death once more. You move deeper into the complex, into the shadowed halls where the air cools. On the walls, scenes of offering unfold like slow-moving dreams. Priests presenting food, dancers moving gracefully before the altar, the queen kneeling before Amun-Ra. The rhythm of Egyptian art feels almost meditative. Repetition, symmetry, balance. It's not just decoration, it's prayer made visible. After some time, you step back into the sun and begin walking south along the edge of the desert plateau. The land opens wide, flat, and endless, dotted with the broken outlines of other temples. You can see the remains of Ramesseum ahead, the mortuary temple of Ramses II, once among the grandest in Egypt. Even in ruin, it commands awe. Massive fallen statues lie scattered like sleeping giants. One colossal head, cracked and half-buried, stares upward toward the empty sky. You approach it and stand beside the ear, taller than you by far. The craftsmanship is astonishing, the features still noble and serene. It's strange, you think, how even ruins can feel alive. Perhaps because they carry traces of what they once were: sound, movement, faith. You imagine the temple in its prime, towering pylons, banners fluttering in the hot wind, priests chanting beneath vaulted ceilings, the scent of burning resin heavy in the air. This temple, too, was not a house for the living. It was built so that the king's spirit, the Ka, could continue to receive offerings forever. Each day, priests performed rituals here, presenting food, reciting hymns, and renewing the bond between the mortal and divine. To neglect the temple would be to starve the soul of the king. And so, through centuries, they kept the rituals alive, even as dynasties fell, even as new kings rose and claimed their own eternity. You continue on toward Medinet Habu, the mortuary temple of Ramses III, one of the last great pharaohs. The gateway rises before you, adorned with carvings of battle scenes, the pharaoh defeating invaders, smiting enemies, triumphant. Yet despite its martial imagery, the temple itself feels calm now, its courtyard filled with sunlight and silence. You step through the gate, and once again, the past feels close. You picture the priests lighting lamps at dawn, the people gathering at festivals, the hum of life continuing beneath the gaze of the eternal gods. As the day warms, you sit in the shadow of a column and watch the light crawl slowly across the carved wall. The scenes tell stories of victory, worship, and celebration, reminders that even the mightiest kings sought peace through devotion. Here, on the west bank of Thebes, every stone whispers of mortality and permanence, how fleeting life is, and how deeply humans yearn to leave something that endures beyond it. The pharaohs built their temples not because they feared death, but because they believed in continuity, that what is remembered lives.
You close your eyes for a moment and listen. The wind moves softly through the ruins, carrying with it the faint sound of wings, perhaps a falcon circling above the cliffs where the tombs lie hidden. When you open your eyes again, the sun is high. The desert gleams like a sea of light. Across the river, the temples of the living shimmer faintly in the distance, facing their eternal reflection, the temples of the dead. And between them flows the Nile, steady and eternal, binding both worlds together in the endless rhythm of time. The heat of the afternoon lingers as you cross back toward the heart of Thebes. The river glows bronze now, its surface rippling in soft, lazy folds beneath the sun. You step off the small ferry and make your way through narrow lanes that wind between mud brick walls and shaded courtyards. The air smells faintly of baking bread and crushed herbs.
Here, life moves differently. The temple walls rise in the distance, their vast stone faces catching the light. But around you, the sounds are small and familiar. A woman grinding grain, children laughing as they chase each other through the dust, a donkey braying in protest at its heavy load. You are in the living city that exists in the shadow of gods. Everywhere you turn, there's a quiet hum of routine. Men mend fishing nets, women knead dough in shallow clay bowls. A boy sits near a doorway, carefully shaping a small clay figurine. Maybe a cat, maybe a god. It's hard to tell. You pass a potter's yard, where rows of amphora bake in the open sun, their pale bellies warming slowly. It's easy to forget that just beyond this everyday scene, the colossal temples of Karnak and Luxor stand, worlds of ceremony, incense, and divine order. But for most people, life doesn't unfold in those grand courtyards. It happens here, in the heat, in the dust, in the rhythm of small tasks done faithfully every day. You turn down another street where a baker's shop is open to the air. The scent is irresistible. Barley bread baking in dome-shaped ovens, their sides blackened from years of fire. The baker, a wiry man with ash on his arms, smiles faintly and offers you a small loaf, still warm. You take a bite, and the taste is earthy, simple, grounding.
Bread, after all, was the foundation of Egyptian life. They baked it from emmer wheat or barley, sometimes sweetened with dates or honey when they could afford to. Historians still argue whether the coarse texture was intentional or just a byproduct of their grinding stones. Either way, you can feel the grit between your teeth, a trace of the same sand that built the pyramids and temples. You wander further, where the street opens onto a small square shaded by a sycamore fig tree. Its leaves shimmer faintly in the warm breeze, casting flickering shadows on the ground. Nearby, a scribe sits cross-legged with a wooden writing board on his lap, dipping his reed pen into black ink. His expression is serene, part focus, part boredom. He's copying accounts, perhaps, or recording grain deliveries to the temple granaries. The life of a temple scribe was neither glamorous nor dull. They were custodians of order, the keepers of ma'at, the balance of things. Without them, no offering lists, no schedules, no prayers would be remembered. Their handwriting, precise and careful, was a kind of devotion in itself. A small group of children watches him work. One imitates the scribe's motions with a stick in the dust, pretending to write an elegant hieroglyphs. You can't help but smile. It's oddly comforting to know that even in the world of the gods, imitation and curiosity belong to childhood. From the square, the smell of roasting fish drifts from a nearby stall. The vendor, an older woman with bright eyes and a linen scarf over her head, fans the fire lazily. She serves you a small portion wrapped in a reed leaf,
seasoned with coriander and a touch of salt. You sit on a low stone ledge and watch as people pass, a mix of traders, farmers, and temple workers heading home for the day. One man carries a basket of lotus flowers, pale blue and pink, their petals drooping in the heat. You follow his path with your eyes as he turns toward the temple gates. Those flowers will end their day floating in offering bowls before the statues of the gods. It's strange how the divine and the ordinary mingle here, how the same hands that cook, build, and trade also tend to eternity. You stroll toward the edge of the market, where stalls display small trinkets, faience beads, bronze amulets, scarabs polished smooth. Some are shaped like the Eye of Horus, meant to ward off harm. Others are little frogs or unks, symbols of life and rebirth. You pick one up, a small greenish charm of glazed clay, cool to the touch. The vendor tells you it's for protection and sleep. You don't need much convincing. As you walk, the hum of voices grows softer, replaced by the low rhythm of footsteps and the occasional bark of a dog. The city begins to quiet as the sun drifts lower, and long shadows stretch across the walls. The heat starts to ease, and a soft golden light spills down the lanes. You turn a corner and find yourself back near the outer walls of the temple. You can hear the faint ringing of bronze as the evening rituals begin again, the opening and closing of doors, the rhythmic chants of priests. The air smells faintly of myrrh and cedar. It's a scent that drifts through the city like memory, marking time in sacred rhythm. For a moment, you pause and watch from afar. The temples, so grand and unchanging, are balanced perfectly against the human world around them. The people's lives, their laughter, their fatigue, their bread and fish and gossip, all flow around the temples like the Nile around its islands. You realize that Thebes isn't just a city of gods and kings, it's a city of endurance. Every home, every street, every quiet act of care and work contributes to the same eternal rhythm. There's a small tavern nearby, nothing more than a mud brick room with low stools and clay jars lined along the wall. You duck inside, escaping the last glare of sunlight. The air is cool and smells faintly of beer, the kind brewed from barley loaves, thick and cloudy. You sip it slowly. It's sour and sweet all at once, strangely refreshing after the long day. Two men nearby are talking in low tones, probably temple guards, judging by their linen kilts and leather straps. They complain about the heat, about taxes, and about the priests who apparently take more incense than the gods themselves. You can't help but chuckle softly. Some conversations truly never change. When you step back outside, dusk has begun to fall. The sky turns a soft violet, and lamps flicker to life one by one. The glow spills gently across the streets, reflected in the polished stone of doorways. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks. Then all is still. You wander aimlessly for a while, passing homes where families gather for supper. Small bowls of lentils, bread, maybe a little honey or onion if fortune smiled that day. You see an old woman sitting by her doorway, spinning flax into thread with patient hands. She hums softly, an old tune with no words. The rhythm of her spinning wheel and the fading light blend together in perfect calm.
Beyond her, you can see the towering outline of the Luxor temple once more. Its columns glow faintly in the torchlight, and its reflection shimmers in the river's surface. It feels close, yet unreachable, like a dream you can walk beside, but never fully enter. As night deepens, the hum of the city fades into quiet. Thebes exhales. The heat seeps from the walls, replaced by the soft coolness of the desert breeze. You sit on a low step, gazing out toward the water, listening to the distant sounds, a boat creaking, a single drumbeat from the temple courtyard, a chorus of frogs along the riverbank. You think about how, in this city, everything, the sacred and the mundane,
coexist so easily. The temples are for gods, yes, but they're also for people. For the artisans who carved them, the farmers who brought offerings, the bakers, the guards, the children tracing hieroglyphs in dust. Maybe that's why Thebes feels so alive, even now. It's not just a place of worship, it's a living organism, pulsing with breath and memory, always balancing between the divine and the human. You take one last look toward the river, where the reflection of the temple lights wavers like candle flames. The air smells of lotus and smoke, and somewhere in the distance, a faint voice chants a prayer that seems meant for everyone, living, dead, and dreaming. And you sit, quietly, letting it all sink in, the warmth of the day, the hush of evening, and the knowledge that every life here, no matter how small, is part of the eternal story that Thebes still tells in silence. You rise from the steps where you were watching the evening settle over Thebes and find a narrow staircase tucked into the corner of the temple courtyard. It's worn smooth by countless feet over centuries, and the air carries that peculiar blend of stone dust and desert warmth. You begin climbing, slowly, the sound of your sandals echoing faintly, imagining the priests ascending here long ago, robes brushing against the sandstone.
The staircase opens onto the temple's roof, a broad, flat expanse of stone that stretches toward the sky. From here, the city spreads beneath you like a patchwork quilt. The Nile a winding silver ribbon, market stalls just faintly illuminated by torchlight, and the distant pyramids glimmering subtly in the waning glow. The view is different from the ground. From above, the city seems calm, patient, its movements softened into a slow rhythm you can almost measure in heartbeats. The temple roof wasn't merely a vantage point. It had sacred significance. The ancient Egyptians believed that the roof connected the earthly realm with the sky, the domain of the gods. Standing here, a priest could gaze upward toward the horizon, where the sun rose and set, timing rituals with celestial movements. Historians still argue whether the alignment of certain temples with stars was purely symbolic or part of precise astronomical observation. But either way, the roof served as a stage between heaven and earth. You imagine the high priest walking here at dawn, robes trailing slightly, carrying a small offering in his hands, perhaps a piece of bread or a sprig of lotus. He would pause at the edge, looking across the Nile, bow slightly to the rising sun, and whisper words that might never have been recorded. You lean against the low parapet and picture his gaze, following the path of the sun as it casts long shadows over the temple's columns below. The flat stones beneath your feet still bear the faint impressions of what might have been scaffolding. Roofs were busy places, not always empty and quiet as they seem now. Small shrines may have been placed along the edge, holding statues or offering bowls. The roofs also provided space for drying papyrus, incense, and ritual herbs. You crouch and trace the edge of one stone with your fingers, noting a shallow groove that could have held a small, long-forgotten container. From your vantage point, the temple's painted reliefs come alive in imagination. You can see the colored walls of the hypostyle hall, even though the paint has faded with the centuries. Figures of gods and kings, faint but persistent, rise from the stone, catching fragments of sunlight like ancient holograms. Perhaps an ancient artisan perched here, smoothing the plaster before the colors were applied, chanting a tiny prayer or humming a tune only he knew. You spot a small chimney-like structure rising from one corner, likely used to vent smoke from the sacrificial fires below. Imagine the smell of burning cedar and myrrh drifting upward, mixing with the desert air. It must have been a strange and heady combination, comforting and holy all at once. You can almost picture the faint wisp of smoke curling into the dawn sky, as though reaching toward the gods directly. Across the roof, there are small channels carved in stone, meant to carry rainwater. They're shallow and precise, and a few still catch droplets when the occasional evening breeze brings condensation.
You kneel to watch the tiny rivulets flow, imagining the priests checking these channels, making sure water did not pool where it shouldn't, careful that the god's abode remained clean and orderly.
You lean back, letting the warm stones support you. The view across the city is mesmerizing. Houses, courtyards, gardens, and small shrines merge into one gentle, golden sea of life. A flock of birds stirs briefly from a nearby reed bed, their wings slicing silently through the sky. Somewhere, a dog barks faintly in the distance. The city breathes softly, slowly, as if aware that you are merely a visitor to its secrets.
High above the temple, the sky deepens into twilight. A faint star glimmers over the western cliffs, and you think of the priests noting its rise, marking the hours and days in their celestial calendars. They might have measured time not in clocks, but in movement. The sun across the sky, the stars across the night. The temple roofs gave them perspective, literally and spiritually. They could oversee not just the building, but the world beyond it. You follow a low parapet to another section of the roof, where stone steps lead to an even higher terrace. It's narrower here, and the stones are uneven, but the view is worth it. Below, the temple courtyard stretches like a miniature model, the hypostyle hall a grid of shadows and light. You can almost hear the faint echo of chants carried upward, a soft, persistent rhythm that might have existed in the air for millennia, repeating itself like a gentle heartbeat.
A few small niches in the roof walls suggest that offerings were placed here, perhaps small vessels of wine, incense, or oil. The priests likely left them as part of daily ritual, a bridge between the human world and the divine above. You imagine one priest sneaking a bit of honey into a vessel just to make the god's day a little sweeter. Even gods probably appreciated small pleasures.
Your lantern casts a flickering light across the stones, revealing faint carvings, hieroglyphs etched into corners, probably as instructions or dedications. Some are weathered beyond recognition, but a few are still legible, telling silent stories of devotion. Historians still argue whether these roof inscriptions were meant for divine instruction or simply the work of attentive builders marking their labor. Either way, they remain, whispering secrets into the stone. A breeze stirs, lifting the dust and carrying faint scents from the city below. You breathe it in, tasting sand, river, and the faint sweetness of lotus flowers. The wind seems to carry voices of priests, of craftsmen, perhaps of worshippers long gone. You close your eyes for a moment and listen, letting the imagined voices mix with the soft sigh of air across stone. From this height, the temple feels even more like a living organism. Every roof, every column, every relief, every carved groove contributes to a single enormous symphony of devotion. The gods are not merely imagined here. They inhabit the space in a way that is tangible, present, almost touchable. You sit quietly, letting the warmth of the stones seep through your legs. The city of Thebes spreads endlessly below, and the desert beyond stretches toward eternity. Somewhere out there, across the sand and river, the western temples wait, silent, patient, eternal. You imagine the priests climbing back down, disappearing into corridors and courtyards, their day of ritual complete. The temple stands silent for now, but the stone remembers. Every step, every offering, every whispered prayer has been etched into memory, as permanent as the hieroglyphs on the walls. And you, standing here above it all, feel that ancient rhythm too, a slow pulse, steady and unbroken, linking heaven and earth, past and present. You descend the worn stone steps from the temple roof, the air cooling as shadows lengthen in the narrow corridors below.
The bustling hum of the city fades behind you, replaced by the hushed echoes of the temple's interior, a quiet world where the ordinary and the divine intertwine. You follow a corridor that narrows into near darkness, the smell of limestone and incense hanging heavy in the air. The path opens into a small chamber, almost invisible to casual visitors. The walls are carved with faint hieroglyphs, some of them nearly worn away. This is a hidden sanctuary, a space meant not for public ceremony, but for intimate, private devotion. It might have been used by a high priest or by those seeking a closer, more personal connection to the gods. You pause, letting your hand brush along the rough stone. In the quiet, it feels alive, as though the walls themselves remember each whispered prayer, each careful placement of offerings over centuries. Some of these chambers contain tiny niches, little alcoves where statues or sacred objects were placed. You peer into one and find a shallow depression, perhaps once holding a figurine of Amun or a small vessel of oil for anointing. You imagine a priest kneeling here in the soft glow of an oil lamp, murmuring sacred words that have long since slipped from memory. He might have lifted a tiny statue, kissed it gently, then placed it back into its niche. The act is almost painfully quiet, a stark contrast to the grandeur and spectacle of the temple courtyard above. You notice faint scratches on the stone floor, shallow grooves that suggest careful, deliberate movement. Perhaps someone used this chamber to practice ritual gestures, rehearsing the precise movements required for larger ceremonies. Historians still argue whether some of these hidden spaces were used exclusively for worship, or if they also served as storage for sacred items and ritual tools. Either way, the air is thick with centuries of unseen devotion. As you explore further, you discover another chamber off to the side, smaller and darker. The ceiling is low, forcing you to bend slightly as you enter. Here, the space feels almost womb-like, comforting and protective. You can imagine the quiet concentration of the priests working here, perhaps meditating on divine mysteries or recording sacred knowledge on fragile papyrus scrolls. On the walls are faint traces of color, red ochre, black, and a hint of blue, likely remnants of painted reliefs. They depict scenes that were meant to guide the soul of the worshiper, showing offerings, hymns, and rituals in miniature. The colors are muted now, but they once would have gleamed brilliantly under the soft glow of lamplight. You move carefully through the chamber, mindful of every echo of your footsteps. You notice a narrow niche carved just above eye level, the space barely large enough for a small statue. Perhaps this held a protective deity, meant to oversee the chamber and bless those who entered. Even in these hidden corners, devotion manifests, small, private, enduring. Some historians suggest these chambers were also used for training younger priests, introducing them to the subtle gestures, chants, and offerings that defined temple life. Others argue that certain hidden rooms were purely ceremonial, used only during rare festivals when specific rituals required isolation. The debate remains, but the effect is the same. These spaces are sanctuaries of quiet, removed from the spectacle and rhythm of the outside world. You trace your fingers along a carved line on the wall, noticing the tiny chisel marks. They are precise, deliberate, a testimony to patient hands that worked here long ago. Imagine a sculptor kneeling on this floor, chiseling a small hieroglyph, whispering a prayer with each strike, careful not to disturb the harmony of the stone. As you move deeper into the complex of chambers, you discover a small, sunken area with a shallow basin carved from stone. It may have held water for ritual purification or for offerings. The edges are worn smooth, evidence of repeated use over countless ceremonies. You imagine a priest dipping his hands carefully, water dripping slowly, each gesture a silent conversation with the divine. The quiet is nearly complete, broken only by the faint hum of air moving through cracks in the stone. You settle into a corner, feeling the weight of history pressing softly against your back. These hidden sanctuaries, unlike the bustling halls and courtyards, are not meant to impress or awe. They are places of introspection, intimacy, and careful devotion. A soft beam of light creeps in from a narrow slit high above, illuminating dust motes that drift lazily in the air. The effect is almost magical, like the chamber itself is breathing slowly, patiently, carrying centuries of whispered prayers in its walls. You wonder how many pilgrims, priests, and novices knelt here, hoping for guidance, protection, or simply a moment of peace. You notice faint inscriptions on the floor, likely marking positions for kneeling or placement of ritual objects. The space feels ritualistically precise. Every stone, every groove, every shadow designed for purpose. Even now, in silence, you can almost sense the rhythm of past ceremonies. Some of the inscriptions depict offerings, bowls of grain, jars of oil, garlands of lotus, alongside tiny figures of gods or protective symbols. The combination of utility and devotion feels intimate, almost like a personal diary written in stone. You imagine a solitary priest returning here after the chaos of the festival, closing the chamber door and letting the world fall away. Perhaps he would kneel in quiet meditation, whispering prayers that had been taught to him but now adapted to his own voice, his own intent. This intimacy, this private devotion feels almost palpable as you move through the chamber, tracing the carvings with your eyes and fingertips. Even though the city outside is alive with noise, commerce, and ceremony, this hidden sanctuary remains untouched, a pocket of eternity. The contrast between the grand temples and these small chambers is striking. One is designed for display and power, the other for devotion and quiet reflection. You rise slowly, letting your eyes adjust to the dimness, and make your way back toward the main corridors. Every step carries a sense of reverence, a recognition that these hidden rooms, though small and unobtrusive, preserve a unique part of Thebes' sacred life. Even centuries later, the sanctuaries carry whispers of human care, devotion, and the subtle art of worship that is quiet yet enduring. You pause at the doorway, glancing back at the chamber one last time. The shadows are deep, the air still, and the stone seems to hum softly with memories of countless rituals. You take a slow breath and step back into the broader corridor, where the light of the setting sun creeps in, casting a warm glow on the carved walls and reminding you of the living city beyond. The hidden chambers are behind you now, silent and patient, guarding their secrets. But the sense of calm, intimacy, and devotion they carry follows you as you move forward through the temple, reminding you that even in a city of gods and grand temples, quiet sanctuaries hold their own kind of sacred power. You step out from the shadowed corridors of the hidden chambers, and for a moment the city seems impossibly bright. The sun has dipped lower, casting warm golden light across the temple walls. You follow a narrow passage leading toward the rear of the temple, where the ancient gardens once flourished. The air here carries the faint scent of vegetation mixed with stone and dust, a curious combination of life and eternity. Temple gardens in Thebes were more than decoration. They were sacred spaces carefully tended to reflect divine order and harmony. Rows of trees, flowering shrubs, and irrigated plots of vegetables all had symbolic and practical purposes. You imagine the priests tending them, measuring the water from the Nile, arranging the plants in geometric precision, each plot a miniature cosmos.
Historians still argue whether these gardens were intended solely for ritual use or if they also provided sustenance for temple staff and pilgrims. Perhaps it was both. You step into a courtyard that must have once been lush with life. Stone channels trace elegant lines through the soil, guiding water to each tree and plant with precise care. Even now, you can see small traces of lotus flowers etched into the stone pathways, reminders of the ancient designer's attention to both form and function. The lotus was sacred, a symbol of creation, rebirth, and the sun. Its pale petals and long stems once swayed gently in the irrigated pools, offering their fragrance to the gods. A sycamore fig rises near the center of the garden. Its roots dig deep into the soil, and its wide branches create soft, dappled shade. This tree was sacred, believed to shelter spirits and provide comfort to those seeking protection. You lean against its trunk and feel the rough bark under your hands, imagining generations of priests performing offerings beneath its canopy, placing bread, honey, or wine in small bowls at its base. In the distance, you spot another smaller tree, perhaps a tamarisk or acacia. Its leaves flutter lightly in the evening breeze. You picture its branches adorned with tiny charms and offerings, beads, small amulets, and carved figurines left by worshippers seeking favor or protection. Some objects would have been for fertility, others for health, and perhaps a few simply for gratitude. The interplay of nature and devotion creates a rhythm that is almost meditative, an eternal, living ritual. You wander through the garden slowly, brushing your fingers along low shrubs and fragrant herbs. Basil, coriander, and mint might have grown here, not only for practical use, but as symbols of purification and blessing. The priests would have carefully tended these plants, using them in rituals, grinding leaves for incense, or weaving them into garlands. Even the scent of these herbs, carried by a soft wind, would have been considered part of the spiritual experience. Bird song drifts faintly from the corners of the garden, perhaps pigeons or sparrows nesting among the trees. The sound is subtle but persistent, a quiet counterpoint to the temple's ceremonial rhythm. You imagine the priests and acolytes moving carefully through the garden, mindful not to disturb the sacred creatures that shared the space. Some historians suggest that certain sections of the gardens were used for ritual instruction, apprentices learning which plants were sacred, how to prepare offerings, and when to perform specific ceremonies. Others argue that the gardens functioned as symbolic representations of the Nile itself, reflecting the river's life-giving energy in miniature. Either way, the gardens created a gentle balance between human activity and divine order. You come across a small stone basin, carved with shallow channels and remnants of inscriptions. It may have held water for purification rituals, or for small offerings to gods represented in the garden. You dip your fingers into the cool water, feeling its weight and imagining the hands of priests doing the same centuries ago, lifting it carefully in reverence. The water glimmers faintly in the fading sunlight, and you picture it reflecting the surrounding greenery, mirroring the sky above, a small universe captured in stone and liquid. The shadows lengthen as you move along a path lined with lotus and papyrus. The plants sway gently in the evening air, their forms delicate but resilient. You pause near a low terrace where the trees create a quiet nook, a space almost hidden from the larger courtyards. It feels like a retreat, a place for contemplation, meditation, or whispered prayers. You can almost hear the faint hum of ritual chants drifting across the garden, carried from the distant temple halls. Here, in the quiet, the garden becomes more than its individual elements. Every stone, every plant, every channel of water contributes to a living, breathing sanctuary. Even the scattered pebbles on the paths seem to hold meaning, guiding movement, marking boundaries, and connecting the human presence to the divine. You step carefully over a raised channel, noticing the remnants of small carvings in the stone. Maybe instructions for the arrangement of offerings, or symbolic patterns representing the cycles of life, death, and renewal. The garden is as much a temple as the stone halls themselves, a place where devotion is lived, not just displayed.
As evening deepens, the light softens to a gentle lavender and the air cools. The desert beyond the walls begins to exhale, releasing heat and dust in slow, measured sighs. The temple garden stands between the human world and eternity, a place of calm reflection, and you feel that serenity settle in your own chest. The path leads you to a small, circular enclosure with a single sacred tree at its center, a symbol of the axis mundi, the connection between earth and sky. Here, offerings would have been left by priests and worshippers alike. You imagine small bowls of honey, sprigs of lotus, or even coins left in gratitude. Every gesture was simple, intimate, and part of a rhythm repeated over generations. You sit beneath the tree, letting the evening breeze carry the scents of lotus, mint, and incense. You close your eyes, picturing centuries of devotion, rituals performed with care, and the gentle flow of life in and around this sacred space. For a few quiet moments, the world narrows to the rustle of leaves, the shimmer of the water channels, and the enduring calm of the temple garden. Even now, after millennia, the garden retains a sense of order, balance, and serenity. It is both refuge and reminder, a living testament to the delicate interplay of nature, ritual, and human devotion. You rise slowly, tracing your fingers along the trunk of the sacred tree one last time, and continue toward the temple's outer paths, carrying the memory of the garden with you as the shadows deepen. You wander back toward the temple's main halls, the sun now fully dipped below the western cliffs, leaving the sky painted in deep purples and muted oranges. The city has softened into twilight. The markets are empty, the dust settling over streets and homes. Inside the temple, a different rhythm takes over, one of quiet preparation and ritualized movement. Torches and oil lamps flicker to life, casting shadows that dance along the walls and columns. The priests move in measured steps, their robes brushing softly against the stone floor. You follow at a respectful distance, letting your eyes adjust to the soft illumination. Even in these low lights, the hieroglyphs carved into the columns seem to come alive, catching the flicker of the lamps and appearing almost as if they are whispering their stories to each passerby. Historians still argue whether the original colors of these carvings were intended primarily for aesthetic pleasure or as sacred instruction. But tonight, in this gentle glow, the distinction feels irrelevant. You pause at the entrance to the hypostyle hall. The massive columns, their capitals shaped like lotus and papyrus blooms, rise overhead like a forest frozen in stone. The evening lamps cast intricate patterns across the floor, and you can imagine the priests' shadows stretching long and thin as they move through the hall. The air is warm, slightly perfumed with the remnants of incense from earlier ceremonies. A soft chant begins somewhere deeper in the temple. The sound is low, steady, almost hypnotic. You can't understand the words, but the rhythm is compelling, each note folding into the next. You imagine the priests aligning their steps with the chants, their voices harmonizing in a ritual dance that has continued for centuries. You remember reading somewhere that historians still debate the exact melodies used in these chants, whether they were strictly formalized or adapted spontaneously during worship. Either way, the effect is mesmerizing. You move along a narrow corridor, the walls on either side adorned with reliefs depicting gods receiving offerings. Scenes of bread, wine, and lotus flowers are repeated over and over, yet they never feel monotonous. Each carving, under the soft flicker of lamplight, seems to tell a slightly different story. A reminder that devotion can be both repetitive and intimate, grand and personal at once. The lamps themselves are simple: clay vessels filled with oil, wicks that burn steadily, releasing a faint, warm scent. You notice a priest pausing to refill a lamp, tilting the vessel with deliberate care. It strikes you how much of temple life depended on such quiet, unglamorous labor. Without it, the rituals could not proceed. The light could not reach the shadows. Even the smallest act was part of a larger rhythm of devotion. You follow the sound of chanting deeper into the temple, toward a side sanctuary where the light is dimmer and the air cooler. The space feels almost hidden, though it is open to those who serve the gods directly. Here, priests kneel and bow, moving slowly through gestures that seem both deliberate and fluid, their motions reflecting the precision demanded by centuries of tradition. You notice how the lamps catch tiny details: the curve of a wrist, the tilt of a head, the folds of linen draping over shoulders. In one corner, you spot a small bowl of water and a few scattered leaves, likely used for purification rituals. The priest dips his fingers and makes small, precise motions, offering them toward a carved statue of a deity. You can almost feel the reverence in the air, a quiet tension between action and stillness that seems to anchor the space itself. The corridors are lined with niches containing statues and offerings, some large and imposing, others small and intimate. You imagine a devotee, long ago, placing a tiny amulet here, perhaps hoping for protection or guidance. The act is simple, quiet, and eternal in its intent. Even after millennia, the energy of these gestures seems to linger in the stone. You follow a narrow passage to another chamber, where the evening rituals continue in a soft, measured pattern. A single priest moves through the space, swinging a censer filled with burning incense. The smoke curls slowly, carrying the faint aroma of myrrh, resin, and perhaps a hint of desert herbs. You watch it twist and climb, ghost-like, reflecting the warm lamplight and filling the chamber with a sense of slow, deliberate calm. In the hush of the corridors, you can almost imagine whispers of the past. Priests, novices, and worshippers moving through these same spaces, performing similar rituals day after day, century after century. Even the smallest details are significant: the placement of a jar, the tilt of a lamp, the timing of a chant. Each element contributes to the temple's rhythm, a heartbeat that has persisted for millennia. You pause at a junction where two corridors meet. Here, the lamplight casts long shadows that stretch across the walls, creating an almost theatrical effect. The carved figures seem to come alive, frozen mid-motion, their gestures magnified by the flickering glow. You notice small, deliberate marks on the stone, perhaps notes left by craftsmen, symbols of offering, or minor adjustments made over decades. The effect is intimate, as if the temple itself is conscious of every movement within it. Even as the shadows grow longer and night deepens outside, the lamps maintain a gentle warmth, holding back the darkness. The rituals continue, slowly, methodically, an eternal dance of light, sound, and devotion. You remember the quiet gardens from earlier and realize that both spaces, the exterior and interior, work together. One nurtures life and growth. The other preserves devotion and order. Both are equally sacred, equally essential. Finally, you pause at the central sanctuary, where the largest lamp casts a gentle pool of light. The priests kneel in a circle, their movements synchronized with the fading chants. The atmosphere is almost tangible, a blend of warmth, fragrance, and subtle vibration that fills the chamber. You stand quietly, absorbing the scene, aware that this moment is both ordinary and extraordinary, a bridge between human effort and divine presence.
The temple at night is alive in a way that is completely different from the daytime grandeur. It is quieter, slower, more reflective. Every flicker of flame, every whispered word, every small gesture resonates through the corridors and chambers, leaving traces of devotion that persist even when no one is watching. You step back slowly, letting your eyes linger on the lamplit walls, feeling the rhythm of the temple's heart. The city outside may be silent now, but within these stone walls, the pulse of sacred life continues, unbroken, patient, and eternal.
Night settles fully over Thebes, and the desert beyond the city exhales a cool, gentle breeze. The lamps within the temples cast soft golden pools of light, and the carved stone surfaces seem to shimmer faintly, catching shadows and flickers that make them appear almost alive. You walk slowly through the temple courtyard, barefoot now, feeling the smooth, worn stone beneath your feet. There is a stillness here that is rare, a quiet, heavy with centuries of devotion and human attention. The moon rises over the western cliffs, pale and steady, spilling silver across the river. Its reflection glimmers in the Nile, a faint echo of the luminescence within the temple walls. You step closer to the edge of the riverbank and pause, listening to the gentle lapping of water. Somewhere in the distance, a boat rocks silently against its moorings, as though even it is moving in time with the slow, eternal rhythm of the city. You return to the temple, walking along corridors now washed in moonlight, streaming through small openings. The interplay of shadow and silver light transforms familiar spaces into something ethereal. Columns that seemed solid and imposing in the afternoon now appear delicate and almost otherworldly. The carvings on the walls, etched deeply into stone, reveal new subtleties: the curl of a god's eyebrow, the precise alignments of a hieroglyph, a tiny depiction of an offering that had gone unnoticed before. You stop at a small courtyard illuminated only by a few lamps and the soft glow of moonlight. The air carries the faint scent of lotus, incense, and desert herbs, mingling with the cool night. You trace your hand over the worn stone of a bench where priests may have rested during long nights of vigil. Imagine them sitting here centuries ago, listening to the distant chants or watching the stars as part of ritual observation. Historians still argue whether temple night rituals were performed daily or reserved for special occasions, but either way, the sense of dedication is palpable. You wander through the moonlit corridors, each step careful, deliberate, echoing softly. In one niche, you notice a small offering left undisturbed: a bowl of water, a sprig of dried flowers. Perhaps someone returned later to retrieve it, or perhaps it was forgotten, yet it remains sacred in its stillness. You consider how many offerings like this must have been left over millennia, each tiny gesture a message of devotion sent quietly into eternity. A soft breeze moves through the open halls, carrying with it a whisper of sound, perhaps the distant calling of a night bird, perhaps just the echo of air through stone. You lean against a column and close your eyes for a moment. The texture of the stone is cool against your palm, smooth in some places, rough in others, worn by countless hands over centuries. You imagine the long procession of worshippers, priests, and scribes whose fingers traced these same surfaces, leaving imperceptible traces of themselves. You walk toward the outer terraces, where the temple's massive pylons cast long, shifting shadows in the silver light. From here, you can see the full extent of the city, quiet now, except for the faint glow of lamps from distant homes. The Nile flows steadily, reflecting both moon and stone, a constant witness to the passage of time. The temples themselves seem to hold their breath, still and solemn, guardians of a city that never truly sleeps, even when humans rest. You pause near a solitary column, studying the reliefs carved along its surface. Gods and kings appear side by side, their depictions so precise and serene that you can almost hear the stories they tell, tales of devotion, power, and the delicate balance between mortal and divine. The moonlight accentuates the curves and lines, making the figures seem almost three-dimensional, as if they might step free from the stone at any moment. In a small alcove, you notice a flicker of movement, perhaps a rat or a small lizard, cautious in the quiet night. You smile softly. Life persists even in spaces built for eternity. Outside the alcove, the courtyard is empty, yet it hums with a kind of memory. Every step taken, every offering placed, every ritual performed leaves a faint imprint in the air, like an echo folded into stone and shadow. You wander back toward the river-facing terraces. The reflection of the temple in the Nile is almost perfect, doubled and shimmering in the slow movement of water. The moonlight highlights the worn edges of steps, the gentle slope of ramps, and the subtle angles of the pylons. You imagine the priests and acolytes performing evening rituals here, moving silently, offering prayers to gods both seen and unseen. Some gestures would have been repetitive, others unique, yet all were meant to honor the eternal. You notice faint carvings along the terrace edges, tiny symbols that once guided ritual movements or marked sacred spots for offerings. You crouch to study one, tracing its lines with your fingers. Even in the dim moonlight, you can see the care that went into its creation, the precise dedication of the hands that etched it. The stone holds knowledge and intention, a slow, silent testimony to devotion beyond memory. The night deepens further, and the air cools. You sit on a low stone step, gazing at the moonlit river and the temple reflection. Somewhere far off, a dog barks, and you hear the faint rustle of leaves in the temple gardens you visited earlier. The stillness is absolute, yet alive, the pulse of centuries embedded in every stone, every shadow, every flicker of light. As you settle there, you feel a deep sense of connection to all who have walked these spaces before you. Priests, worshippers, scribes, and even the anonymous hands that shaped the stone and carved the hieroglyphs. Every action, every prayer, every quiet gesture has been part of an unbroken chain. The temple, the city, and the river carry these memories forward, as steady and unyielding as the Nile itself. The moon rises higher, casting silver across the courtyard. The shadows stretch and contract, moving with the night wind. You close your eyes briefly and let the rhythm of the temple, the river, and the desert fill you. This is Thebes at rest, not dead, not silent, but breathing slowly, patiently, eternally. You stand finally, brushing dust from your robe, and take one last walk along the moonlit terraces. The stone feels smooth under your fingertips, warm from the day, and cool in the shadows. You gaze across the Nile at the distant western temples, their outlines dark against the horizon, patient and eternal. And as you step back into the quiet corridors, leaving the moonlight behind, you carry with you the soft hum of Thebes at night, a gentle, persistent rhythm of devotion, memory, and calm. The first hints of dawn brush the horizon, soft and pale, and you realize that the night has passed almost imperceptibly. The temple is quiet, the lamps extinguished, and the courtyard bathed now in a gentle pre-sunlight glow. You walk slowly across the stone floors, listening to the faint hum of the city awakening in the distance. Somewhere, a bird begins its tentative morning song, and the river glints faintly in the muted light. You move toward the temple gates, noticing how the shadows of the columns stretch long and thin across the courtyards, reaching toward the rising sun. The stone feels cool beneath your fingers, and the air carries the scent of early dew mixed with the faint aroma of desert herbs and lingering incense. This quiet moment is a threshold, the gentle pause between night and day, between sleep and wakefulness, where the temple seems suspended in its own rhythm. The priests begin to stir. You see a figure emerging from a side corridor, carrying a small offering for the morning rituals. His movements are deliberate, slow, and serene, a continuation of the unbroken chain of devotion that has carried the temple through centuries. Historians still argue whether some of these early morning rites were standardized or left to individual interpretation. But here, in the pale dawn, such questions seem less important. The care in each gesture speaks for itself. You wander along the outer corridors, tracing the worn carvings and hieroglyphs that have witnessed countless dawns. Each figure etched into the stone seems to glow faintly in the soft light, shadows stretching along their contours, emphasizing the careful craftsmanship of the artisans. You remember the hidden chambers, the gardens, and the lamp-lit corridors of the night. All these layers of devotion, private and public, intertwined in the fabric of the temple. A gentle breeze flows through the temple, carrying with it the rustle of leaves from the sacred gardens. You pause to inhale the fragrance of lotus, basil, and papyrus. The air feels alive yet calming, infused with the quiet energy of life persisting through cycles of time. The gardens, once thriving with vibrant colors, now appear softly muted in the early light, but the serenity remains. Even in semi-darkness, they exude a sense of order and harmony, a reflection of the larger rhythm of the temple itself. You approach the river-facing terrace again. The Nile glimmers faintly, a silver ribbon that moves slowly, unconcerned with the passing of days and centuries. The reflection of the temple in the water is pale and wavering, shifting with gentle ripples. You watch a small boat glide silently along the river, its oars barely disturbing the surface. The scene feels timeless, as though the river has always flowed past this city, carrying whispers of devotion and memory from generation to generation. Inside the temple, you notice the faint traces of offerings left overnight, small bowls of water, sprigs of flowers, remnants of incense. They sit quietly in their niches, waiting for the morning rituals to acknowledge them. You pause, imagining the hands that placed them, the prayers that accompanied them, and the intention behind each gesture. Even forgotten offerings hold a kind of quiet power, a testament to the enduring connection between humans and the divine. You move into the central sanctuary, where the rising sun begins to illuminate the inner walls. Light spills over painted reliefs and carved columns, bringing the figures to life with warmth and subtle color. The gods and kings seem to stir in the soft illumination, their expressions serene and patient. You can almost feel the presence of those who came before, priests, worshippers, scribes, each adding their own layer to the temple's memory. As the day begins, the sounds of the city return. A distant bell tolls, a dog barks, and the first voices of merchants and neighbors carry faintly through the air. Yet within the temple, the atmosphere remains hushed, contemplative, as if the stone itself remembers the long night and honors its passage. You wander through familiar corridors, noticing small details anew: a carved niche, a weathered symbol, the smooth indentation where hands have rested countless times. You pause in the temple courtyard, watching as sunlight gently caresses the columns. The shadows that were long and black in the night now soften into pale gray, revealing subtle textures in the stone. You reflect on the continuity of this place, how countless nights and days, centuries of devotion and labor have passed over these very stones. It's a rhythm that has persisted regardless of individual lives, a constant pulse linking past and present. In the gardens, the sacred trees sway lightly with the morning breeze. The lotus, papyrus, and sycamore fig catch the early light, petals and leaves shimmering with dew. You imagine priests tending these plants, carefully measuring water, arranging offerings, and speaking quiet words of reverence. Even now, the garden seems alive, a soft, breathing sanctuary that mirrors the steady flow of the Nile and the patient endurance of the temple. You find a low step near the river-facing terrace and sit, letting the warmth of the slowly rising sun touch your shoulders. The temple, the gardens, the corridors, and the hidden chambers all carry a sense of calm that feels almost physical. You breathe in slowly, exhaling gently, letting the layered sounds and scents of Thebes, the river, the wind, the faint stirring of city life, settle into a harmonious rhythm. As the final hints of night fade and full daylight emerges, you take a last slow walk through the temple grounds. Every stone, every carving, every plant and shadow holds a fragment of time, devotion, and life. The city awakens, the river flows, the desert beyond hums quietly, and the temples continue to stand, patient, enduring, and serene. You close your eyes briefly, imagining the countless souls who have passed through these spaces, their prayers, gestures, and silent acts of devotion folded into the very stones beneath you. There is comfort in this continuity, a gentle reminder that life, memory, and reverence can persist quietly and steadily across millennia. The soft glow of morning touches every surface, and you feel a sense of closure, of being part of something both intimate and eternal. You rise, brushing your hands lightly over the warm stone, and carry the quiet rhythm of Thebes with you, a gentle, persistent heartbeat of history, devotion, and calm. Now, as the city hums to life around you and the sun rises fully over the horizon, let your thoughts drift slowly, as if following the river, the gardens, and the silent corridors of the temple into a gentle, dreamlike calm. The day is beginning, yet here in this quiet moment, you are suspended between sleep and wakefulness, night and morning. The temples of Thebes, their stones still warm from the sun's first touch, exhale a sense of patience and serenity. You can feel it under your hands, in the cool air, in the faint hum of the river. Every carved relief, every shadowed niche, every rustle of leaves carries a gentle reminder. Life continues, quietly and rhythmically, beyond your immediate perception. The soft rhythm of the temple flow through you. Feel it in your chest, in the subtle slowing of your thoughts, in the calm awareness of breath moving gently in and out. The sacred gardens, the hidden chambers, the lamp-lit corridors, each a sanctuary of quiet, a space where time is measured not in minutes, but in devotion, care, and presence. You are part of that rhythm now, a gentle observer carried along the eternal pulse of Thebes. The Nile reflecting the morning light, the river flowing steadily, unhurried, carrying stories and whispers from centuries past. The temples, silent yet alive, hold these memories within their stones. You can picture the faint movements of priests and worshippers long ago, each act of devotion folding into the next, creating a calm, enduring harmony that exists beyond words or comprehension. As you let these images settle, your body softens, your mind eases, and a gentle sense of peace wraps around you. Every shadow and flicker of light, every leaf and carved stone guides you slowly toward rest. Allow yourself to drift with the quiet rhythm, carried by the patience and serenity of Thebes itself. And now, softly, you let the city, the temples, and the river fade into memory, carrying you toward sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.